They say a stolen key can open the door, but it cannot stop what waits for you on the other side. This is the story of two sisters, identical in face but opposite in soul. This is the story of how jealousy bought a one-way ticket to the wrong side of the world. In the warm city of San Antonio, Texas, lived the Calloway twins. Same face, same blonde hair, same blue eyes. But that is where the sameness ended. First, there was Debbie. Debbie was the kind of woman who remembered her patients' birthdays, who left soup on the doorstep of the elderly neighbor in 4B without knocking, because she knew Mrs. Henderson was too proud to say thank you and too hungry to turn it away. She was a registered nurse at St. Luke's Medical Center. Steady hands, steadier heart.
Hey, Mr. Ortega, I know that IV is uncomfortable. Just breathe for me, okay? You're doing so well. I'll be right here.
She worked double shifts without complaint. She tithed 10% even in the months she barely had enough. She was the kind of daughter her parents called, not because something was wrong, but just to hear her voice. She was the one the whole family quietly leaned on, and she never once made them feel the weight. Then there was Daisy. If Debbie was still water, Daisy was a lit match looking for something expensive to burn. Daisy believed that hard work was a punishment designed for people who had not yet figured out how beautiful they were. She spent her days in a ring light glow, filtering her face into a fantasy, chasing followers who would never pay her rent, and screaming, "She's so lucky," at every influencer with a yacht in her grid. She was an Instagram celebrity with $43 in her checking account. While Debbie wore her scrubs like a badge of honor, Daisy wore outfits that made the women at church pray louder. They were identical. Standing still side by side, you would hold your breath trying to choose. Same jawline, same laugh lines, same passport photo. But the moment they opened their mouths, the difference walked into the room and sat down. Debbie spoke and people leaned in. Daisy spoke and people reached for their purses. The trouble began the evening a FedEx envelope arrived at their shared apartment, and inside it was a fiancé visa, 2 airline tickets, and a handwritten letter from a man named Khalid Al-Mansouri, a man who had spent 8 months getting to know Debbie through late-night calls and honest letters, a man who had written, in careful, deliberate ink, "I have waited for a woman like you my whole life." Daisy read it over her sister's shoulder, and something behind her eyes went very, very still. Apartment 7C on Mirasol Street was a 2-bedroom unit with good bones and a leaky kitchen faucet that Debbie had been meaning to call the landlord about for 6 months. She never got around to it. Between the double shifts and the grocery runs and the quiet way she held everything together, the faucet kept dripping and Debbie kept saying next week, and next week kept becoming the week after that. Before we start, if you're new here, welcome. Take 2 seconds right now to like this video and subscribe to this channel. We drop stories like this every week and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's get into it. The apartment told you everything you needed to know about the Calloway twins without either of them saying a word. Debbie's side of the bathroom counter held a tube of unscented lotion, a ponytail holder, and a small devotional book with a broken spine from being opened so many times. Daisy's side held 17 products whose names Debbie could not pronounce, a ring light that had its own dedicated outlet, and a mirror so large it had taken 2 delivery men and a furniture dolly to get through the front door. On the Tuesday that would matter most, Debbie came home at 8:47 p.m. still wearing her scrubs. She had covered a colleague's morning shift and then stayed 3 hours past the end of her own, because a 7-year-old named Marcus was frightened, and his mother had stepped out, and Debbie was the kind of woman who did not leave frightened children alone in hospital rooms. She came through the front door smelling like antiseptic and cafeteria coffee, her ponytail half undone, her sneakers still tied because she had not stopped moving long enough to notice. Daisy was on the couch in a full face of makeup at 9 o'clock in the evening, ring light blazing, filming her 4th attempt at a skincare routine video. "Can you not walk through the frame like that?" she said without looking up. Debbie set her bag down, washed her hands at the leaky sink, and started making rice. She made enough for 2. They ate at the small table by the window the way they always did, Daisy picking at her food and scrolling, Debbie eating quietly, still halfway inside the hospital in her mind. The rent envelope sat on the counter where it always sat on the first of the week. Debbie had already put her portion in 3 days ago. Daisy's side was still empty. "The ring light makes my skin look yellow in here," Daisy said. "I need a better apartment. Something with south-facing windows." Debbie looked at the envelope, then at her sister. "The rent's due Friday." I know when the rent is due, Debbie. Do you have it? Daisy stabbed a piece of chicken. I'll have it. She would not have it. They both knew this. Debbie would slide the remaining portion under the landlord's door before Friday morning, and she would not mention it again, and Daisy would not thank her. And this small, unremarkable moment would repeat itself the way it had repeated itself for the better part of 2 years. It was the architecture of their life together. Debbie building, Daisy leaning, and the whole structure somehow still standing because one of them refused to let it fall. The faucet dripped. Daisy went back to her phone. Debbie cleared both plates. Outside, a FedEx truck turned onto Mirasol Street. Neither of them heard it yet. The FedEx envelope arrived on a Wednesday morning, while Debbie was still on her call. She had been talking to Khalid for 41 minutes by then, sitting cross-legged on her bed with her back against the headboard and a mug of tea going cold on the nightstand, the way she always did on her days off. The laptop screen cast a soft light on her face. She was laughing at something he had said, her hand covering her mouth the way it did when something caught her off guard and genuine. Khalid al-Mansouri did not look like what Daisy would have expected, had she been paying attention for the right reasons. He was not flashy. He did not wear his watch where the camera could catch it. He had kind eyes and a measured way of speaking, like a man who had learned early that the most important things deserve to be said carefully. He asked Debbie about her week the way people ask when they actually want to know. He remembered the name of her difficult patient from 2 calls ago. He laughed quietly and often. He was, in every visible way, completely gone over her. I told my aunt about you, he said, near the end of the call. She wants to meet you. She said anyone who makes me talk this much must be either extraordinary or dangerous. What did you tell her? Debbie asked. I told her I hadn't decided yet. She laughed again. The mug of tea stayed cold and forgotten. Daisy appeared in the doorway somewhere around the 30-minute mark, leaning against the frame in her silk pajamas with her arms folded, watching. She had the look she sometimes got. Not quite a smile, not quite something else. Calculating, the way a cat watches a bird through glass. She stayed long enough to take the shape of the man on the screen, then drifted back to the living room without a word. The knock at the door came 20 minutes later. Debbie signed for the envelope, still smiling, the phone tucked between her ear and shoulder, as she said her goodbyes to Khalid. She set it on the kitchen table and opened it slowly, the way you open something you have been quietly hoping for long enough that you are almost afraid to confirm it. Inside, a U.S. fiancé visa bearing her name, 2 airline tickets, San Antonio to Dubai with a connecting flight, and a letter, handwritten on heavy cream paper, in ink that had pressed deeply into every word like the hand behind it, meant every single one. I have waited for a woman like you my whole life. I would be honored if you would come. Debbie sat down. Her hand went to her mouth again. Her eyes filled and she let them, because no one was watching, except that Daisy was watching. She had come back to the kitchen doorway without Debbie hearing her. She stood there reading the letter over her sister's shoulder, the visa, the tickets, the handwriting, the words. And when Debbie finally looked up with wet eyes and a smile that had nowhere big enough to go, Daisy smiled back. It was a perfect smile. It just didn't reach her eyes. And somewhere behind them, quietly and completely, a door opened that would not be easy to close. Daisy moved quietly that evening. That was the first thing that should have said something. Daisy was not a quiet person. She filled rooms. She announced herself. She was the kind of woman who sent a text and then called to make sure you had read it. But that Thursday evening she moved through the apartment like water, soft-footed and careful, and if Debbie had not been so full of joy, she might have noticed. The celebration had been Daisy's idea. We have to mark this, she said, when Debbie came out of her room still holding the letter. You got a visa, Deb. You're going to Dubai. Let me make you tea. Debbie had looked at her sister with that open, unguarded face she had never quite learned to protect, and said yes because Debbie always said yes when Daisy reached toward her. It happened rarely enough that she never wanted to discourage it. She sat at the kitchen table with the visa and the letter laid out in front of her, reading Khalid's words for the 3rd time while Daisy moved behind her at the counter. The kettle went on. The chamomile bags came out. The honey jar opened with its small glass-on-glass sound. Daisy's back was turned the whole time. In her coat pocket, folded inside a piece of tissue, were 4 tablets she had ground to powder that afternoon in the bathroom with the back of a spoon, the faucet running so Debbie wouldn't hear. She tapped the powder into the honey and stirred until it disappeared. Then she poured the water, dropped in the bag, and brought the mug to the table with a smile that had been practiced. "To my sister," Daisy said, who always lands on her feet. Debbie wrapped both hands around the mug the way she always did, like warmth was something to be held on to. She took a sip, then another. She was mid-sentence. Something about the connecting flight, something about what she would pack. When the words began to slow, her eyes stayed soft and happy even as they lost their focus. Her head tilted the way a flower tilts before it folds. She was still smiling when she went limp. The mug didn't fall. Daisy caught it. She stood over her sister for a long moment, looking at the face that was also her face. The same jaw, the same lashes, the same small scar above the left brow from a bicycle fall when they were 9. Debbie's chest rose and fell in a slow, medicated rhythm. The visa sat on the table beside her open hand. Daisy picked it up. Then she did what she had already decided she was going to do before the kettle had even finished boiling. She dragged her sister by the arms down the hall, through the utility door, and into the basement storage unit, the narrow concrete room where the building kept spare equipment and forgotten things. She laid Debbie on the floor with the detachment of someone completing a task. She deadbolted the door from the outside. She stood there in the dark hallway holding the key. Then she leaned close to the door and said it quietly, like a thing she had been carrying for a long time. "You always were the lucky one." She pocketed the key. She went back to the kitchen, and she began to figure out how to become her sister by morning. She started with the makeup. It took longer than she expected, not the removing of it, but the staying removed. Daisy had not seen her own bare face in natural light in longer than she could honestly remember. The ring light had become her mirror, her filter, her version of truth. But she stood now under the harsh white glow of the bathroom vanity and wiped everything away with Debbie's unscented cleansing cloth, and what looked back at her was so familiar it made her stomach tighten in a way she did not examine too closely. She looked exactly like her sister. She had always known this, the way you know a fact without feeling it. But standing there, stripped of every layer she had built between herself and the world, it landed differently. She could work with this. She already was. She went to Debbie's room and opened the closet. Everything in it was folded. Of course it was. She pulled out the blue top, the one Debbie had been wearing in the photo Khalid had saved as his phone background, the one that sat soft against the collarbone without asking for attention. She put it on. She found plain dark trousers, flat shoes, a small stud earring on the left dresser. No lashes, no contour, no highlighter across the cheekbone like a declaration, just a face and a blue top and the simple, unhurried look of a woman who had nothing to prove. Then she practiced the laugh. She had watched Debbie laugh enough times to know it started in the eyes before it reached the mouth. A slight crinkling at the corners, genuine and unperformed. Daisy's laugh arrived at the lips first. It was a small but critical difference, and she stood at the mirror for 11 minutes working on it, trying to make joy look like it lived inside her, rather than something she was putting on for an audience. By the 12th minute, she decided it was close enough. Austin Bergstrom Airport was busy for a Friday morning. Daisy moved through the departures hall with Debbie's carry-on, Debbie's passport, and a careful, measured walk she had rehearsed in the apartment hallway, quieter than her own, less performance in the hips, less awareness of being watched. She kept her eyes calm. She kept her hands still. She told herself she was Debbie the whole way to the security line, like a prayer she did not entirely believe in. The TSA agent was a broad-shouldered man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He took the passport and looked at it the way they always do. First the photo, then the face, then the photo again. Then he held it a beat longer than that. Daisy felt the pause like a hand around her throat. She did not reach for her phone. She did not shift her weight. She smiled. Not her smile, but the other one. The one that started in the eyes. The one that said, "I have nothing to hide and a patient waiting for me at home." He handed it back. Have a good flight. She walked through the gate with her heartbeat still loud in her ears and did not let herself exhale until she was seated in 14C, the plane beginning its slow crawl away from the terminal. She pressed her forehead to the cold oval window and watched Texas disappear beneath the clouds. She was going to Dubai. She was going to her life. The plane lifted, and Daisy Calloway, traveling as Debbie Calloway, smiled out at the open sky with the full, unguarded brightness of a woman who had not yet learned what was waiting for her on the other side. The first sign came somewhere over the Atlantic, in the form of an announcement so calm it took Daisy a moment to understand what she was actually being told. The captain's voice came through the overhead speakers with the unhurried patience of a man delivering weather information to people who had no choice about the weather. There was a sandstorm system over the UAE, he explained. Dubai International had suspended incoming flights until further notice. Passengers connecting through to Dubai would be rerouted at the layover hub. Alternative arrangements were already being coordinated on the ground. He thanked everyone for their patience and returned the cabin to its silence as though he had announced nothing more significant than a slight delay for beverage service. Daisy sat very still in 14C. At the connecting hub, a gate agent found her before she found the customer service desk. A brisk woman in a navy uniform holding a printed list, moving through the stranded passengers with the efficiency of someone who had done this before and would do it again tomorrow. Calloway, Deborah? Yes, Daisy said, because she had been saying yes to that name for 36 hours, and it was beginning to come automatically. Good news. Your fiancé's family already reached out. There was a preparatory visit arranged for you in Mongolia. His aunt's estate outside Ulaanbaatar. Mr. Al-Mansouri confirmed this morning that he'd like you rerouted there directly, given the Dubai closure. Your new boarding pass is here. Flight leaves in 2 hours. She said it the way you say your table is ready, as though it were a small convenience being offered, not a sentence being handed down. Daisy looked at the boarding pass. She looked at the gate agent. She thought about saying something. Several things, in fact. None of them were things Debbie would say. Thank you, she said instead. She found a bathroom and sat in the last stall with her carry-on between her knees and her face in her hands for 6 of the remaining 120 minutes. Then she got up, bought an overpriced airport coffee she barely tasted, and boarded a plane to Mongolia. She told herself it was temporary, a detour, a formality. She would meet the aunt, smile for a few days, and then Khalid would come and they would go to Dubai together, and the life she had taken would finally begin to fit her properly. She was still telling herself this when the plane landed. The doors opened. Mongolia did not wait for her to be ready. It reached straight through the gap between the jet bridge and the aircraft door and introduced itself personally, a wall of cold so complete and so immediate that Daisy's lungs simply stopped cooperating for a full 2 seconds. It was not cold the way Texas got cold in January. It was not an inconvenience. It was a climate with opinions, and its opinion of her was immediate and unfavorable. She stepped out into 22-degree air in a blue short-sleeve cotton top. The wind came from everywhere at once. Snow moved sideways past the terminal sign, Terminal 2, in dense, indifferent sheets. The other passengers around her were wrapped in layers that suggested they had known, that they had prepared, that they belonged to a world that had warned them. Nobody had warned Daisy. She clutched her passport to her chest with both arms crossed against the cold and stood at the terminal entrance while the blizzard pressed against her bare skin like a verdict, and she opened her mouth and screamed. The wind took it instantly. Nobody heard her. The driver who collected her from the airport was a small, silent man named Erden, who communicated primarily through the direction of his eyes. He gestured toward the car. He gestured toward her bag. He gestured toward the road when she asked how far. She spent the 40-minute drive watching the city give way to open steppe, the buildings thinning and then disappearing entirely until there was nothing outside the window but frozen land and sky, and the occasional dark shape of livestock standing in the white like they had been placed there to make a point. The estate announced itself with a wooden gate and a smell. Daisy had not previously given much thought to what yaks smelled like up close. She had not previously given much thought to yaks at all. She had a vague understanding that they existed in the way she had a vague understanding that taxes existed, present somewhere in the world, relevant to other people's lives, no cause for personal concern. She revised this understanding the moment Erden opened the car door and the Mongolian winter delivered a second opinion directly to her face. Fatima al-Mansuri was standing in the doorway of the main house when they arrived. She was 68 years old, barely 5'3", and wrapped in a dark wool coat that had seen decades of honest use. She had the eyes of a woman who had raised difficult animals and difficult people, and knew the difference between the two was mostly patience. She looked at Daisy, the way a customs officer looks at a declaration form, methodically, without hurry, checking each line against what she already knew. She did not hug her. She nodded once. "You are tired," she said. It was not a question. "Come in. There is soup." The soup was good. Everything else was an education. Daisy had not finished unpacking, her suitcase still open on the narrow bed, her ring light leaning against the wall in its case, when Fatima reappeared in the doorway holding a pair of rubber boots and a laminated feeding schedule with handwritten annotations in 2 languages. She set them on the end of the bed with the quiet authority of a woman who had never once in her life needed to raise her voice to be obeyed. "The animals eat at 6, Fatima said. "You will learn the schedule tonight so you are ready in the morning." Daisy looked at the boots. She looked at the schedule. She thought about her ring light. "Is there Wi-Fi?" she asked. Fatima looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not unkind, but was entirely without sympathy, the way a mountain is not unkind to the person who chose to climb it in the wrong shoes. "No," she said, and left. The prayer alarm went off at 4 a.m. Daisy heard it through the wall, a small, persistent sound, and then heard Fatima's footsteps moving to the prayer room, the soft settling of a body onto a cold stone floor, and the low, steady rhythm of devotion that did not require an audience or an aesthetic or a single bar of signal to sustain itself. Daisy lay on her back in the dark with rubber boots at the foot of her bed, and a feeding schedule on her nightstand, and her ring light sitting in its case like a joke nobody was laughing at. Outside, the yaks waited patiently for morning. They had nowhere else to be. The guests were arriving on Saturday. Fatima mentioned this on Thursday morning over breakfast, in the same tone she used for everything, measured, unhurried, carrying the quiet weight of a woman who said things once and did not repeat them. "Khalid tells me you cook," she said, setting down her tea. "He says you make a lamb stew that his mother would have approved of." Daisy looked up from the feeding schedule she had been pretending to study. "He said that?" "He said it twice," Fatima replied. "Once when I asked, and once when I did not." There was a brief silence in which Daisy understood that this was not a request. She spent Friday afternoon in the kitchen with the particular focused panic of someone diffusing something they don't have the training to diffuse. The ingredients were already laid out: lamb, root vegetables, dried herbs she could not name, a dark broth that smelled like it had been built over time with actual knowledge and intention. Debbie would have known what to do with all of it. Debbie owned cookbooks with broken spines and margin notes. Debbie was the kind of woman who understood the difference between simmering and boiling and why it mattered. Daisy had once burned instant noodles. She moved through the recipe with the confidence of someone performing confidence, which is a completely different thing. She added what seemed like enough of everything. She stirred when it looked like it needed stirring. She turned the heat up when the color wasn't developing, then down when something began to happen at the bottom of the pot that she did not understand and did not investigate further. When the guests arrived on Saturday evening, the stew was gray. Not a warm, earthy gray. A troubled gray. A gray that raised questions about the intentions of the cook. It was saltless in some places and aggressively something else in others, with a texture that suggested the lamb had not so much been cooked as discouraged. One of the guests, a woman of about Fatima's age with the same careful eyes, took a single spoonful and set her spoon down with a precision that said everything without requiring words. Fatima ate her portion without expression. The medical supply incident came an hour later, while the guests were in the sitting room and one of the farmhands appeared at the back door with a deep cut across his palm from a wire fence. The kind of clean, bleeding wound that required pressure, irrigation, and a proper bandage, all of which were sitting in the clearly labeled first aid kit on the kitchen shelf. Fatima turned to Daisy with the natural expectation of a woman who had been told her guest-to-be was a registered nurse. Daisy looked at the cut. She looked at the kit. She looked at the cut again. I need a moment to find the right. I have it, said Fatima, and reached past her, and handled it herself in under 90 seconds, her movements efficient and unbothered. She said nothing after. She did not look at Daisy with accusation or surprise. She simply dried her hands and returned to her guests. But on her way through the kitchen, she paused beside the counter where Daisy stood, and her eyes dropped briefly to the small butterfly tattoo on the inside of Daisy's left wrist. Delicate, dark-inked, unmistakable. She looked at it for just a moment. Then she took out her phone and, without any explanation at all, photographed it. Khalid arrived on a Monday morning with no announcement and no luggage, which meant he had not come to stay. He had come for one reason, and he intended to complete it and leave. Daisy heard the car on the gravel and looked through the kitchen window and felt something drop through the floor of her stomach when she saw him step out, taller than the screen had suggested, quieter in his movement than she had imagined, his face carrying the particular expression of a man who already knows what he is going to find and has made his peace with the sadness of it. Fatima met him at the door. They spoke briefly in the hallway, in low voices that Daisy could not hear from the kitchen, where she had positioned herself with a mug she was not drinking from, because some part of her understood that the kitchen was where this was going to happen, and there was no longer any point in running toward a door that was already closed. He came in and sat across from her at the table. He did not accuse her. He did not raise his voice. He looked at her with eyes that were tired and clear and said, "I'd like you to see something," and slid his phone across the table the way you slide something toward a person who needs to finally understand what they have done. The screen showed a video call, already connected. Debbie was on the other end. She was sitting in a neighbor's kitchen in San Antonio, a blanket around her shoulders, her face pale, and her eyes swollen from 2 days of darkness and a locked door, and the particular terror of not being believed immediately when you tell people your twin sister drugged you and stole your life. She had been found by Mrs. Henderson from 4B, who had heard the pounding on Sunday morning and called the building super with the quiet insistence of an elderly woman who trusted her own ears. Debbie looked at the screen. Then, very carefully, she looked at her sister's face, wearing her name. She didn't say anything for a moment, neither did Daisy. There was nothing in the room that needed to be established anymore. Every question had been answered by the simple fact of both of them being visible at the same time. Khalid took his phone back. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the table between them, and when he finally spoke, his voice was not cruel. That was almost worse. "The Dubai apartment is a company office," he said. "I sleep there 4 nights a year, maybe 5. I have lived on this estate for 6 years. This is my home. This land, these animals, this kitchen. This is the life I was asking someone to share." He paused. Debbie knew that. We talked about it for months. She knew exactly where she was coming to, and she wanted to come. Daisy said nothing. "You would have hated it," he said simply and without malice. "You already do." Erden drove her to the airport that afternoon. Fatima handed her a coat at the door, a heavy, borrowed thing, shapeless and warm, because Daisy had arrived in a blue cotton top and it was still 22-degree where, and whatever Fatima thought of her, she was not the kind of woman who sent anyone into the cold without covering. Daisy sat in the back seat and watched the estate disappear behind the wooden gate and said nothing, the entire way to the terminal. Not because she had nothing to think. Her mind was loud and airless and without rest, but because there was genuinely nothing left to say that would make any difference to anyone, including herself. She carried the borrowed coat through Terminal 2 like a thing she had not earned, which was, by then, the only kind of thing she owned. San Antonio received her the way it always had, with heat that pressed against the skin like a hand that would not move, a sky so wide and blue it seemed indifferent to everything that had happened beneath it. Daisy walked out of Austin Bergstrom Airport in a Mongolian sheepskin coat at 94 Saurio, and did not take it off until she reached the taxi line, because she had nothing underneath it that belonged to her. The police report had been filed on Sunday. By the time Daisy landed on Tuesday, there was a lawyer involved, a court date being scheduled, and a formal document with her full name on it that used words like fraudulent misrepresentation and identity theft, with the calm, administrative clarity of a system that did not require her to feel anything in particular for it to proceed. She was not imprisoned. The lawyer, appointed because she could not afford to choose, explained that the circumstances, combined with Debbie's decision not to pursue the maximum available charges, had produced a more measured outcome. Restitution, community service hours, a restraining order that meant Debbie's name, address, and likeness were now things Daisy was required by law to keep her distance from. She signed where she was told to sign. The community service assignment came through 6 weeks later, typed on a form with the county seal at the top, and a location printed at the bottom that Daisy read 3 times before she accepted that it was not a mistake. St. Luke's Medical Center, Laundry and Linen Services Department. She reported on a Wednesday morning in the plain clothes the court required, no ring light, no contour, nothing that performed anything, and was handed a cart and a rotation schedule by a supervisor who did not know her story and did not need to. She moved through the hospital corridors the way she had once moved through the airport, trying to take up the right amount of space, trying to be unremarkable. She was pushing the cart past the 3rd-floor nursing station on her 4th Wednesday when she heard Debbie's voice before she saw her, that particular tone warm and unhurried, speaking to someone at the desk about a patient in room 12. Debbie turned into the corridor and they were 10 feet apart before either of them could rearrange anything about the moment. Debbie looked at her. Not with anger, and not without it. Something quieter than both. The expression of a woman who had processed something painful all the way down to its last honest layer and come out the other side still standing. She nodded once. Small and direct and complete. Daisy looked at the floor. She pushed the cart to the elevator and did not look back. 3 weeks later, Debbie flew to Mongolia. She did not post about it. She did not need to. There is a photograph that exists only on Khalid's phone, taken by Fatima on an unremarkable Tuesday evening in the estate kitchen. Debbie on a video call with her mother back in San Antonio, laughing at something with her hand over her mouth. A Mongolian winter dark and steady through the window behind her, Khalid's hand resting on her shoulder with the ease of something that had always belonged there. She is wearing the blue top. Ooh. The right woman, the right country, the right life, not stolen, not borrowed, not taken from anyone. Simply, finally, hers. The key that was stolen could open the door, but it couldn't change who walked through it. And that, right there, is the story of Daisy Calloway. A woman who thought she could steal a face and walk into someone else's future, only to find that destiny has a way of delivering you exactly where you belong, whether you are ready or not. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If this story moved you, surprised you, or had you talking to your screen at any point, go ahead and hit that like button right now. It truly means the world. And if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, this is your sign. Hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and come back for the next one. There are more stories coming, and they only get better from here.